Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review. Today we're looking at a design with the title At the Beach, and you will see that I am in very summery clothes because we're in the midst of a heat wave, a genuine heat wave here when I'm recording, and I get to a point where the heat, because it doesn't cool down too much at night, the heat just becomes a little bit enervating and I can't seem to build myself up to be bright and cheery the way I normally would be in these videos. So I thought, well, I'll put something bright on, but I'll stay cool. And so this is how you see me. This week, Design Eye has analysed a competition piece of mine that is from quite some considerable time ago. I was trying to work out how long ago. It's well over 10 years. The title was At the Beach. It was for an inland regional exhibition and competition at which I did a demonstration as well. And so I was focused, I think, more on the demonstration than I was on the competition piece, which is wrong. You should be able to compartmentalise that. But already in looking at it now, I can see the one glaring error that I'm going to talk about, and that is that it has no baseboard. It is on a base, but the base is obscured by all of the rest of the design, and so it does appear as though it's melting into the top of the table, and that doesn't set off the design to its best. But let's go through the actual process of what the design is, what I put into the design, what my thinking was at the time, and then we'll look at how our AI Design Eye analysed it in terms of the principles and elements of design, and then see what suggestions there are for improving the design. So this had an allowable space of 60 centimetres in width, and the height was unlimited. It was judged from the front, so exactly the way you see the photo presented to you here. What I've done on a board that you can't see, so a circular board, I would say a small one, is I've placed a large shell, and in that there is some floral foam. It was something that we used at that point in time. And then sea sponges at the back and at the front. In the sea sponges I put some cresspedia. There is a line of yellow roses to show the sunshine. We've got a plaited palm leaf at the back of the design, and that was supposed to mirror or be a reflection of the umbrella fern that comes out through the top of the design. What I was hoping that it would look like is that it was obviously the umbrella, the yellow for the beach and the sea and the sunlight, and just that gathering of things that you might find at the beach. So it was supposed to be almost a scavenging point for the design. There is a piece of driftwood through the design that the shell is resting on, and at the base of the design I've put some other fern in to reflect the movement that is created by the umbrella fern and by the palm leaf that is at the back of the design. It didn't place in the competition. I think I got a recollection that at the time I was a bit disappointed because I thought it was quite a good interpretation of the theme, but looking at it now I can understand why it didn't place in the competition. And I think having just a thin baseboard, something that came out that emphasised the size of the design, the depth of the design as well, and that could just be simply something that was a thin piece of board that was covered in sand. And just think about how much that would add to the design in terms of my interpretation. It would look like all of this had collected on the beach, at the beach, and I'd found it at the beach. So very much a glaring error that I can look back on now and think about, this wasn't right. But let's see what else our AI Design Eye has got to say about the principles and elements of design. We're looking at line first of all. Line plays a strong structural role in this design. A clear vertical line is established through the upright stem and ascending yellow blooms, while softer curving and horizontal lines appear in the surrounding foliage and sculptural base materials. This interplay echoes the coastal environment, reflecting upright seagrasses balanced by wind-shaped forms. So there is some movement in the design, even though the line is very vertical, and that's probably something that I should soften a little bit more. There's probably not enough of the windswept look in for my thinking when I look at it back now. But let's see what else needs addressing in this design. Looking at form, the form is asymmetrical and organic, with a strong vertical thrust emerging from a grounded sculptural base. The contrast between the compact textured foundation and the lighter upper structure creates visual tension and interest. So in terms of form, we're looking at the shapes that are there in the plant material or the shapes that are created by the design itself. And it is very much an organic form to the design. There's movement there, there's texture, there's the balance is there in terms of having the lightness at the top and the grounded base at the bottom. There's probably not enough visual tension for my liking, but we'll continue on and see what else we need to do. Space is thoughtfully managed. Open space around the vertical lines allows the design to breathe, while the denser base anchors the composition. The separation between the base and the upper elements enhances clarity and reinforces the sense of emergence from a sand or a shoreline. That's true to a certain extent. I just think that it's a little bit out of balance. The more I look at it, the space that is around that vertical upright, the fern placement on one side is almost too much. There's too much space. It just looks a bit like it's lost out there, or it belongs on the other side, and it has the ability to split the design vertically down the middle in two. So I'd have to be a bit more mindful of the placement of the roses, the yellow roses, and I'm thinking in my head, I need to spiral it up a bit more. And the palm leaf at the back, the plaited palm leaf, I don't think is enhancing the design at the moment. It's taking us out into a space that isn't really enhancing the negative space within the design. It's just it's a bit too much of a curve and too bulky, even though you can see through it. It's a bit too bulky for that side of the design. We shall move on. Texture. Texture is richly layered and evocative. Velvety and fibrous brown forms, rib shell-like structures, soft feathery greenery with smooth rose petals. These textures strongly support the coastal narrative and invite close inspection. So as you know, I do like to focus on textural contrasts, and there are layers of texture. The sponges give you this wonderful rough texture, but the form is quite smooth and quite sculptured. The shell obviously has both rough and smooth textures on it, which is very handy. And there's just that combination of the fern, which is a different sort of texture to the smoothness of the roses, interspersed with the cresspedia, which has got a rough texture but is in the same colour as the roses. And so we have that contrast within the same colour palette. So let's look at colour now. The palette centres on yellow, immediately referencing sunlight and warmth. Supporting colours of greens and sandy browns act as natural neutrals, allowing yellow to remain dominant without overwhelming the composition. So it's not that you look at it and all you see is the yellow. You do actually see the hints of yellow in the shell and in the sponges, so that those browns, whilst they're a neutral colour, do have some sort of yellow. We recognise some sort of yellow in that colour that is there, and the green is just softens it all up and makes it clean looking in my eyes. It's good contrast, yellow and green. Value and tone. Mid-tones dominate, with the bright yellow blooms providing high value highlights. This tonal contrast ensures visual focus while maintaining harmony. I'm having trouble with the words today. So this is just what I talked about, that the colour the yellow doesn't pop out the way it could, completely away from the design, that we see that it's there, but it is almost caressed by the other colours that are there, because you can see a little bit of the yellow in the other colours that are there. Pattern emerges through the repetition of yellow flowers along the vertical axis and the recurring rounded textures in the base. These repetitions create cohesion and rhythm. So one of the things about the pattern is, yes, there's a pattern in the placement and the repetition of the roses through that design, but it's also about the repetition of the form. So we've got round form at the top of the rose itself. We've got the vertical placements. We've got the curved lines of the fern and of the palm. We've got, once again, the rounded forms, but with the yellow colour of the craspedia placements. So it all, that pattern, as it says, creates that cohesive look to the design. It makes it all one design rather than, oh, we've got round here, we've got straight here. Those sorts of contrast that we don't want to see in a design. Balance. This design achieves asymmetrical balance. The strong vertical element is countered by the visual weight and spread of the base materials, resulting in stability despite the upward movement. So we've talked about that a little bit. Yes, there's a stable base and there is the upright. Even though there is asymmetrical balance, I'm not as happy with the balance, the visual balance in this design as I could be. I would like to, as I said earlier, I think I would like to have thought about spiralling those roses up along where the stem placement is, just to give it a little bit more movement, but also to bring the balance a little bit more aligned with that placement of the upright fern there. Dominance and focal area. Dominance is clearly established by the vertical line of the yellow blooms, which draws the eye immediately. Secondary interest is held in the textured base, encouraging exploration of the entire design. So what it's saying here is that even though the yellow, by the colour and by the placement of the roses, is a dominant feature of the design, we're not arrested by it. We don't just stop and look at the yellow roses. We are encouraged by moving up that line to look at the fern, which then brings us back down into the base. And that's an interesting base, and there's sort of nooks and crannies in it that make you look, as it said, look a bit closer to it. There's contrast there that you want to see and recognise what there is, but there's pattern and there's rhythm there as well. So we look at contrast now. Contrast is evident in the vertical versus horizontal, smooth petals versus coarse textures, bright yellow versus muted earth tones. These contrasts add depth without fragmenting the composition. And this is very much what I've talked about all the way through, is that there's contrast in texture, in colour, and in movement and in line, but it's not tearing the design apart. It's actually bringing you in and around the design and asking you to look further into the design to see what there might be there that is of interest. So rhythm and movement now. Movement flows upward from the base through the floral line, then gently outward via the foliage. This rhythm mimics natural coastal motion of growth shaped by wind and tide. It's a very poetic and far-reaching analysis, but I'm happy that it can see that it fits into that framework. You know, by using the AO, we're having something independent. Look at the design in terms of the principles and elements of design. And so if it sees that in a design when all it looks at is the image, that's really good feedback for me that my thinking was right. The execution needed a little bit more practice. Proportions are well considered. The height of the floral line feels appropriate to the mass of the base, preventing the design from appearing top-heavy or static. And I think it definitely moves away from static because there's so much movement in the design in terms of the forms of the materials that I've used. As I said, I'm a little bit unsure about the proportion. I think it would almost, if it had the baseboard, I would be happier because that would give me a framework for how big the base is in terms of the height. So I'd be looking at that Fibonacci sequence, the 358, and making sure that those proportions, those ratios, were working as well as they could if I had the baseboard there. Scale. The scale feels intimate and exhibition appropriate, inviting close viewing while still reading clearly from a distance, and that's probably due to the very limited colour palette that I've used and the fact that it's against a white wall, which always helps when you're in competition mode. but it does do that. It does feel like you can see what it is from a distance, but then you are invited to go and look closer and to look into those areas where it looks like there's something there, or behind other things, and you just want to see what's actually there. Harmony and unity. Unity is achieved through a consistent coastal palette, repeated forms and cohesive material language. All elements contribute to the same environmental narrative. So it obviously sees it as harmonious and united in its design. For my part, I would question whether the roses really are part of the environmental narrative, but I couldn't think of anything else that I could use that had that bright yellow colour that on their own would be the right size and have the right gradation of sizes in the opening of each of the individual flowers, and would match the Cresspedia. I could have used just Cresspedia. I could have, and that probably would have worked as well if I could get some of the bigger sized ones as well as the small ones, just to highlight the textural quality. It would look a bit like sand, but then I would have to look at where is my smooth texture coming from to contrast with the rougher textures, which would dominate the design if I just used the Cresspedia. So another area where I could start to think about the interpretation in terms of those principles and elements of design. I think sometimes we get a bit carried away by interpretation, and this is, we're going to tell this story with these plant materials, and we don't always fall back on the principles and elements and start thinking about where's the line, what contrast have I got enough contrasting textures, what colour am I going to use, is the colour going to help tell the story? It's just about, I've got this design, I've got this idea, let's just put it together and hope for the best. So always good to revisit these principles and elements of design and to have them in the back of your head when you're doing your design planning. I need to take that advice as well. Now let's look at some of the suggestions for improvements for the design. So firstly, refine the vertical rhythm by adjusting spacing between the yellow blooms for a more deliberate progression. Did I not say this? So I could do it in that line, so keep it as that straight vertical line up that way, but I think probably what I would do is I definitely would change the spacing between the rose placements, and I would have it spiral up that stem of the umbrella fern. So most definitely one that I would try. Clarify the shoreline narrative by simplifying one base texture to allow another to dominate. So what it's saying there is that there are so many textures in that base mass that I need to simplify it into clear contrasts of texture. And I think that if I had that baseboard, as I talked about, with the sand on it, then that would say the base part of this design is a rough texture. Anything else that you see in this conglomeration of rough textures is a contrast moving up into the roses, which are the smooth, and up into the umbrella fern, which is sort of a combination of both. So I think that I can see how that would be simplify the design and also give me a much better interpretation in terms of these principles and elements of design. Enhance depth by slightly staggering foliage placement around the vertical line. So there are, if I was spiralling up the roses, I would take out that palm leaf and I would have some other finer foliage, probably not the umbrella fern anymore, but something else that was some airy and light and had a little bit of a curl to it, so that I could intersperse that with the roses to give me a bit more of the vertical line, but that ability to drop your eye down into the base of the design as well. Strengthen directional flow by subtly echoing the vertical line within the base materials. So here it's asking me to consider having more upright placements. So I've got some quite horizontal placements and some diagonal placements in that base area, and it's suggesting that a little bit more subtlety in the vertical placement of the designs would help. So if you can imagine the shell being a little bit more upright, so a little bit more on its end, would that enhance the design? Or would it become too dominant in that part of the design? I think the reason I had it tucked down more at the diagonal or almost horizontal was that I didn't want it to dominate in the design. Same with the sponge that's at the front with the crespita in it. If I had that so that the open part of it was facing upward, would that help the design? Would it give me more air and negative space through the base of the design? So once again, a good suggestion and one that I could play around with just to see, and that would be a matter of moving things around, taking the photos, doing the comparison with the photos and seeing whether that idea actually helps in the interpretation of design. So that's our design for this week at the beach on this very hot day. If you would like any of your own designs analysed, you can go to the website and just follow the instructions there. Within about 24 hours you'll have the results back, and we always have a human judge look at it as well, so that if you've got questions after you get your feedback, you've got someone to contact to talk about, I don't understand this, or can you explain this a little bit better, or how would I do this particular thing that's suggested. So our help is always at hand, because we want you to enjoy your floral art journey as much as we've enjoyed ours over the years. I will leave you to think about your designs. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.